My son laughed at my pension check, called it coffee money. What he doesn't know is that the survivor benefit from that check, the one that started when his mother passed, is the direct deposit that has been paying his mortgage for the last 22 months. I'm Leonard. I sorted mail for the United States Postal Service for 36 years. That monthly check isn't much, but it was built on a promise. A promise that ensured my wife would be taken care of if I went first. Now, it's ensuring my son doesn't lose the house he couldn't afford on his own, and he has no idea. This is about more than hidden money. It's about what happens when respect dies before the truth comes out, and how a quiet man with a modest pension found himself at the center of a silent war he never agreed to fight. The survivor benefit was Alina's security. We chose it together when I retired. The pension would be reduced by just 4% to guarantee her 55% of it for life if I passed. It was a simple, good decision for people who built a life on simple, good decisions. When cancer took her 6 years ago, that benefit didn't just stop. It transferred. It became my son David's inheritance, though he never saw the paperwork. David is 38. He works in marketing, a world of projections and promises that feels foreign to a man who handled tangible things. Letters, packages. He married Chloe 5 years ago. They bought a house 2 years later at the very peak of the market with an interest rate that made my own first mortgage look like a fairy tale. I remember the dinner where he laid out the numbers, his voice tight with a strain he was trying to hide. The payment was nearly half of their combined take-home pay. Chloe, a freelance graphic designer, had inconsistent income. I saw the foundation of that purchase, and it was sand. He asked if I could help with the down payment. I had some savings from selling our old camper after Alina passed, money I hadn't touched. I gave him $15,000, a gift, not a loan. I told him it was from his mother, that she'd have wanted it. He hugged me, and for a moment he was my boy again, relieved. But the relief was temporary. About 8 months after they moved in, the market adjusted. Chloe lost her biggest client. David's company froze bonuses. The first time he mentioned being stretched thin, I heard the unasked question hanging in the air. I started sending $500 a month just to ease the pressure. I told him it was from my pension, that I had enough. That was true. What I didn't tell him was the mechanics of it. You see, after Alina died, the Office of Personnel Management automatically converted that survivor portion. Instead of going to a spouse, it became payable to a dependent child, a category David, as an adult, didn't fit. But the money was still allocated, still drawn from the pension fund. The bureaucracy had a path for it, a direct disbursement to the retiree, with the understanding it was for the support of a dependent. In my case, the only dependent left was my son, whether the government recognized his adulthood or not. So every month, 2 deposits hit my account. One, for my reduced annuity. The second, the survivor benefit. I quietly began routing that second, larger deposit directly into David and Chloe's joint account. It covered exactly 62% of their mortgage principal and interest. I never announced it, I just did it. In my mind, it was Alina still providing. It felt right. For the first year, David just thanked me for my help. Then, the tone began to change. It was a Sunday barbecue. David was showing a friend from work his new patio furniture. I was tending the grill. I heard the friend ask, "How do you swing this place on the salary they pay us?" David laughed, a dismissive sound. "Oh, my dad kicks in a little. Retirement hobby. Keeps him feeling useful, you know? Plus, his pension from the post office is basically coffee money. He doesn't need it." I felt the words like a physical chill. Coffee money. The product of 36 years of sorting in a building with no windows, of icy truck bays in winter, of a back that still aches in the damp. Useful. He said it was my pension, but he was dismissing the very source of his own stability. He had conflated my monthly gift with my entire financial existence and found both of them quaint. That was the first crack. The pressure, however, kept building. Chloe wanted to start a family. David wanted a newer car. The house needed a new HVAC system. My $500 gift was now seen not as a lifeline but as a baseline. The requests became more frequent, more formal. They were no longer about getting by, they were about keeping up. Then 17 months after I started the mortgage transfers, David asked to meet for lunch, just us. He picked a noisy gastropub, not our usual diner. He didn't meet my eyes when he sat down. After the waiter took our order, he slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a printout of a loan amortization schedule. A figure was circled in red at the bottom, the total remaining principal. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "Chloe's pregnant. We're thrilled, but with the baby coming, we need to restructure our debt. We need a lump sum to pay down this mortgage principal so we can refinance into a lower payment. We're looking at $35,000. I stared at the number. It was more than twice what I'd given him for the down payment. "David, that's most of what I have left," I said quietly. "That's my safety net. That's for if my roof goes or if I need care." He finally looked at me, and his expression wasn't pleading. It was frustrated, as if I was being deliberately obtuse. "But you don't have big expenses. You live simply. Your pension covers your basics. What do you even need a big savings for at your age? This is for your grandchild. This is an investment in our family's future." At your age, coffee money. The two phrases fused together in my mind, forming a single devastating truth. My son saw my life as essentially over, my resources as stagnant leftovers to be redirected to where real life was happening. His life. He had no concept of the survivor benefit stream, no idea that the coffee money he mocked was actively subsidizing his present. He was asking me to drain my capital, while being utterly ignorant of the revenue stream that was already funding his largest liability. I told him I needed to think about it. I needed to look at my finances. He took the paper back, his mouth a tight line. "Don't think too long, Dad. The rate lock window is small." The chill from the barbecue had become a permanent cold spot in my chest. I began to document everything. I printed 2 years of bank statements. I highlighted the dual deposits from the U.S. Treasury. I circled the automated monthly transfer to David and Chloe's joint checking account. I dug out my original retirement election forms, the ones with a leaner signature next to mine, choosing the survivor benefit. I assembled it all in a simple blue folder. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed to see the truth laid out on paper, because the spoken version was getting distorted. The confrontation came a week later, uninvited. They showed up at my house on a Tuesday evening. Chloe was glowing, her hand resting on her stomach. David carried a folder of his own, colorful brochures for refinance deals. We made small talk in the living room, but the tension was a third presence in the room. "So, Dad," David said, unable to wait any longer, "did you have a chance to think about our proposal?" "I did," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm sorry, David. I can't give you $35,000. I can help in other ways when the baby comes, but I can't liquidate my security like that." The room went silent. Chloe's smile vanished. David's face flushed. "You can't or you won't." "I can't afford to." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Come on, Dad. What costs do you have? Your house is paid off. You drive a 10-year-old car. You spend your days gardening and going to the library. What exactly is the big financial drain? You're sitting on money that could change our lives, and you're treating it like a museum piece." And there it was, the full, unfiltered dismissal. My life, my careful planning, my lifelong work reduced to a museum piece. The cold spot in my chest cracked open. "You think my pension is coffee money," I stated flatly. "It's a fixed income from a dead-end job, yeah," he fired back, the anger he'd been banking now out in the open. "It's not like you were some executive. You moved boxes. You have enough for your simple life. We're asking you to share so we can build something real." In that moment, I made a decision. The path of quiet suffering, of gentle correction, closed off. He had called the foundation of his own existence a dead-end job. He had called my provision simple. He needed to see the machinery. "Wait here," I said. I walked to my study, my heart pounding in my ears. I picked up the blue folder. When I returned, I placed it on the coffee table between us. I opened it to the first page, the bank statement. "Point to my pension deposit," I said to David, my voice terrifyingly calm. He leaned forward, irritated, and tapped a line. "There, $1,240 monthly, like clockwork." "Now," I said, pointing to the line directly below it, "what is that?" He squinted. "It's another deposit, $1,820 from the same source. So what? A different account?" "No," I said, "that is the survivor benefit, the benefit I elected for your mother. When she died, it didn't vanish. By the rules of my plan, it continued, for you." I turned the page. I showed him the transfer authorization. I showed him the highlighted line, every month, transferring $1,820 from my account to his. I showed him the math on a notepad page where I'd calculated it, 62% of his mortgage. His face underwent a slow, horrifying transformation, confusion, then dawning, sickening comprehension. The color drained from his cheeks. He looked from the paper to me, his mouth slightly open. Chloe snatched the statement from the table, her eyes scanning the numbers frantically. "You've been paying our mortgage," David whispered, the anger gone, replaced by a hollow shock. "With Mom's. With the benefit I secured for her, yes, which became yours, which you just called a museum piece from a dead-end job." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of his worldview collapsing. He was not the self-made man weathering a tough market with a little paternal help. He was a man whose key asset was being funded by the very thing he ridiculed. His independence was a polite fiction I had been financing. Chloe spoke first, her voice trembling not with gratitude but with a new, sharper fear. "Does this mean, if you stop?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. David finally looked up at me, and I saw it, not apology, not yet. I saw the panic of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not his own. The cliffhanger wasn't a legal letter. It was this silent, reverberating question now hanging in the room, more dangerous than any demand. "What happens now that you know?" The silence in my living room didn't last. It shattered into a dozen different emotions, all of them loud. Chloe's fear was the first sound. "You mean we can't afford this house, at all?" David didn't answer her. He was still staring at the transfer authorization, his finger tracing the line from my account to his over and over, as if the motion could change the digits. "You set this up without telling me," he said, his voice hollow. "You just decided to make us dependent." "I decided to help my son," I corrected, my own calm feeling fragile. "The method was a detail. The intent was to keep you in your home." "A detail?" He finally looked up, and the shock was curdling into something darker, a wounded, defensive anger. "This isn't a detail, Dad. This is you controlling my life with money I didn't know existed. You let me think I was managing, let me feel the stress while you had a secret safety net. That's not help. That's paternalistic." He used the word like a weapon, paternalistic. In his mouth, my quiet support became a character flaw. Chloe was crying now, silent tears streaking her makeup. "What happens if you get sick? What happens if you die? Does this payment just stop?" The questions were practical, born of pure survival panic. "The survivor benefit would cease upon my death," I said, stating the bureaucratic fact. "The pension stops. There is no further continuation." That was the second detonation. The color that had returned to David's face drained away again. His financial reality wasn't just fragile in the present. It had an expiration date tied to my lifespan. He was not building equity in a home. He was a tenant in a house owned by the ticking clock of my mortality. They left that night without another word. The blue folder sat open on the coffee table, a monument to the revealed truth. The first call came 2 days later. It was David, his voice strained but trying for neutral. "We need to talk about a transition plan. We can't have this sword hanging over us. We need to get the mortgage into our own names." I agreed. Of course I agreed. I wanted him to stand on his own, but I knew the numbers he refused to see. "You'll need to qualify for the full payment on your own," I said gently. "The bank won't care about the history of my transfers." "We'll refinance," he said with a brittle confidence. "We'll get a longer amortization, a lower rate. We'll make it work." He didn't ask for advice. He didn't ask for the name of my financial advisor. He hung up. The great silence began. For 3 weeks I heard nothing. No updates, no visits. The automated transfer, however, still happened. $1,820 left my account on the 3rd of the month, as it had for 22 months. I did not stop it. To stop it without warning would have been an act of war, but watching it go now felt different. It was no longer a silent gift. It was an acknowledged subsidy, paid into a void of resentment. Then on a Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. I answered. "Is this Leonard Brewer?" a professional female voice asked. "Yes." "Mr. Brewer, my name is Anya Sharma. I'm a loan officer with First Mercantile Bank. I'm calling regarding a refinance application for David and Chloe Brewer. We're verifying some aspects of their income and payment history, and we have a question about the consistent monthly credit to their joint checking account from an external source." My heart sank. He'd gone ahead, he'd applied, and now the machinery was turning. "I see," I said, choosing my words with extreme care. "The applicants have listed this as a family gift, constituting part of their stable monthly income for qualification purposes." Ms. Sharma continued. "Our standard procedure requires a letter from the source confirming the nature of the gift, that it is indeed a gift with no expectation of repayment, and affirming the intent to continue the payments for at least the next 3 years. Could you provide such a letter?" 3 years. They wanted me to sign a letter to a bank, legally stating I would continue funding my son's mortgage for 36 more months, a promise that would become part of his loan file. The subsidy would no longer be a private arrangement. It would be a binding financial fact, documented with a federal institution. I told Ms. Sharma I needed to review my own finances and would get back to her. She politely gave me a deadline, 1 week. I called David immediately. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Dad." "The bank called me, David. They want a letter promising I'll keep paying your mortgage for 3 years. A pause, so write it. It's what you've been doing anyway." "It's not that simple. Signing that letter makes it a formal part of your financial profile. It locks me in. What if I have a medical event? What if I need that money?" "Then we'd figure it out," he snapped, his frustration boiling over. "But if you don't sign it, the refinance falls through. Our debt-to-income ratio is too high without that payment stream. They'll deny us. Is that what you want? After all this, you want to be the reason we get denied." The manipulation was clumsy, desperate. He was no longer asking. He was cornering. The son who'd belittled my pension was now demanding I legally certify it as his foundational income. The irony was so profound it was painful. "I won't be pressured into a legal commitment, David. Not like this." "Then what was the point?" he shouted, the line crackling with his anger. "What was the point of showing me all that, of making me feel like a fool, if you're not going to help me fix it? You dropped this bomb in my living room, and now you're walking away from the fallout." He hung up. The fallout. That's what I had become. Not a father, not a support system. A geological event that had disrupted his landscape. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet turmoil. I spoke to my friend Walter, a retired accountant. He listened to the whole story, then whistled low. "Len, you've got yourself a Russian nesting doll of a problem. The money, the pride, the bank, the baby on the way. He can't see past his own shame to the math, and the math says he's sunk without you." On the 3rd day, I made a decision. I would not sign the bank's letter, but I would not leave him to drown without a lifeline. I drafted a different letter. It was to David and Chloe. I wrote that I would continue the monthly transfers for 6 more months, a half-year bridge. This would give them time to adjust their budget to increase their income to make a realistic plan. At the end of those 6 months, the transfers would stop. The bridge would end. They would need to be prepared to carry the full weight of their choices. I printed it. I signed it. I put it in an envelope. It felt, for the first time, like I was drawing a boundary that wasn't made of silence but of clear, written words. I drove to their house that evening, intending to slip it into the mailbox. But when I turned onto their street, I saw David's car in the driveway and the hood was up. He was standing beside it, talking animatedly on his phone. I pulled over a few houses down, watching. His body language was all frustration, a hand running through his hair, a sharp kick at the tire of his car. I rolled my window down just a crack. "I don't care what the manual says, the diagnostic is $700, he was saying, his voice carrying in the quiet street. "No, we can't just put it on the card, Chloe. The card is maxed. I told you that. Because the refinance didn't go through. No, he wouldn't sign the letter. He said no. I don't know what we're going to do." He listened for a moment, his shoulders slumping. Then he said the words that froze me in my seat. "Maybe we have to list it, sell it. Before we get in any deeper, we can't keep relying on a source that can just vanish." He was talking about selling the house whose mortgage I was paying, the ultimate fallout. My intervention, meant to create stability, was now pushing him toward a cliff. The envelope in my hand felt suddenly heavy, its 6-month promise now seeming both too little and too much. If I gave it to him, would it stop the sale or just delay the inevitable? If I didn't, was I pulling the trigger myself? I drove away without delivering the letter. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into the online portal for the Office of Personnel Management. I navigated through the clumsy menus, finally finding the section on survivor benefits. I wanted to see the official designations, the rules in stark government text. And that's when I found the pivot, the thing that changed everything. The webpage was clear. Upon the death of a retiree, the survivor benefit ceases unless there is a qualified surviving spouse or a dependent child under the age of 22. I had known that. But then I read a footnote, a small block of text I must have glossed over years ago. It stated that if the sole designated survivor predeceased the retiree, and there are no other eligible dependents, the retiree could apply to have the survivor benefit deduction removed from their annuity. The reduction would stop. The full, original pension amount would be restored for the remainder of the retiree's life. My breath caught. Eleanor was gone. David was an independent adult, not a dependent. According to the rules, I was shouldering a 4% reduction on my pension for a benefit that was, in the government's eyes, going to no one. I had taken that money and voluntarily routed it to David, but the government didn't know that. To them, that monthly survivor portion was just vanishing into an administrative void while I lived on less. A wild, terrible thought began to form. What if I applied to have the reduction stopped? What if I claimed my full pension? The 4% increase would be modest for me, about $50 a month, but the consequence for David would be catastrophic. The $1,820, the entire survivor benefit stream, would simply cease to exist at its source. There would be no money to transfer. The bank would see the payment stop. The house of cards would collapse immediately, not in 6 months, but now. It was the nuclear option, a button I never imagined I would see, let alone consider pressing. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about the brutal, objective truth of the situation. The benefit had a legal purpose, support for a dependent. David was not, legally or practically, my dependent. I was voluntarily diverting it. I could choose to stop, not by halting a transfer, but by erasing the fund itself. I picked up the phone. I didn't call David. I called the OPM Retirement Services line. After navigating an automated maze, I reached a human, a woman named Linda. I explained my situation. My wife had passed. My adult son was not a dependent. I was currently receiving the reduced annuity with the survivor deduction. I asked about the process to have the deduction removed and my full annuity restored. Linda was kind but thorough. Yes, Mr. Brewer, that is a possibility. You would need to submit Form RI 23-7, a cancellation of survivor benefit election, along with a certified copy of the death certificate of your last eligible beneficiary. The process can take 90 to 120 days for processing. Once approved, the deduction would cease, and your annuity would be adjusted retroactively to the date of application or the date of your spouse's death, depending on the circumstances. 120 days, 3 to 4 months, a timeline. I thanked her and hung up. The form was downloadable from their website. I found it, RI 23-7. It sat there on my screen, a PDF of potential devastation. Filling it out would be an act of financial secession. It would formally, legally, sever the financial link that Alina and I had created to protect each other. It would declare to the government that the chain of care was broken. I did not download it, but I knew it was there, and that knowledge changed the balance of power in a fundamental way. I was no longer just a father who could stop writing a check. I was a retiree who could dismantle the very mechanism of the check. David's vulnerability was now absolute, and I was acutely aware of it in a way that felt heavy and terrible. The next development came from an unexpected direction. A week later, I received a formal-looking email. The subject line was, First Mercantile Bank Inquiry Regarding Payment Source. It was from Anya Sharma, the loan officer. She wrote that without the signed gift letter, they could not consider the external payments as qualified income. However, their underwriting team had noted the 22-month history of identical deposits from my account to David's. They were now, as part of their due diligence, requesting clarification from me on the nature of these deposits. Were they gifts? Were they loans? Was there any agreement, written or verbal, about future continuation? The bank was no longer just asking for a promise about the future. They were investigating the past. They were looking at the trail I had left, the same trail I had shown David, and they were drawing their own conclusions. A pattern of payments that large and that consistent didn't look like casual gifts. It looked like a structured support agreement. If they classified it as an informal loan, it could be considered a debt, worsening David's financial ratios even further. The institution was now involved. The private family secret was under institutional scrutiny. I had to reply. I stared at the email for a long time. What was the truth? They were gifts, yes. But were they? A gift is given freely with no strings. My gifts had been given under a veil of omission, and they had created a web of dependency and resentment. Did that change their nature? I typed a careful, one-sentence reply. The historical payments from my account to David Brewer's account were monetary gifts with no expectation of repayment. I hit send. It was true, technically. It felt like a lie. The bank's decision came 48 hours later. David called me, and this time there was no anger in his voice, only a flat, exhausted defeat. They denied us. Officially. The underwriter said the payment history was suspicious without a formal letter. They said it indicated a reliance on unstable external support. They recommended we seek a cosigner or substantially increase our earned income before reapplying. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, Chloe's talking about moving in with her sister in another state. She says we need a fresh start where the cost of living is lower. The house, the grandchild on the way, the life they'd built. It was all unraveling, and I was holding the thread. My revelation, meant to shock him into reality, had instead accelerated the crisis. The cliffhanger was no longer a question of what I would do. The cliffhanger was now a single, stark image. A for sale sign being hammered into the lawn of the house my pension had bought, while my son packed his belongings, believing his father had chosen principle over family. And I was standing there, holding a government form that could either be a stay of execution or the final notice of eviction, unsure which was the right, or the kind, or the fatherly thing to do. David didn't put the house on the market. He did something else. He went behind my back to the one entity he thought could force my hand, the Office of Personnel Management. I found out about it because a second letter arrived, this one from OPM itself, addressed to me, but with a case reference number I didn't recognize. It was a formal request for information. It stated they had received an inquiry from a concerned party regarding the disbursement of survivor benefit funds from my annuity. The inquiry alleged that funds designated for a dependent survivor were being misdirected, potentially constituting an improper payment. They were giving me 30 days to provide a written statement clarifying the use of the survivor benefit portion of my monthly annuity. My hands trembled holding the paper. David had reported me. He had called the federal government and essentially accused me of fraud. The shock was so total it felt like a vacuum. This wasn't anger or desperation anymore. This was a tactical strike. He was trying to trigger an audit, to have the government itself reroute the money directly to him, cutting me out as the middleman. Or worse, to have the benefit terminated altogether if misuse was found, burning the entire system down for both of us. The strategic cruelty of it took my breath away. He had weaponized my own secret against me, using the bureaucracy I'd navigated for decades as a bludgeon. He wasn't just trying to save his house. He was trying to seize control of the revenue stream, and he was willing to risk blowing it up to do it. I didn't call him, there was no point. The battlefield had changed. This was now a matter of federal record. I called my friend Walter, the accountant, again. This time I read him the letter. He was silent for a long moment. "Len," he finally said, his voice grave. "This is serious. This isn't family drama. This is an allegation of improper use of federal benefits. You need to talk to someone who knows this world, not me." He gave me the name of a woman, an attorney named Mara Chen who specialized in federal employment and pension law. I called her office that afternoon. Her assistant got me an appointment for 2 days later. Those were the longest 48 hours of my life. The automated transfer went out on the first of the month, as always. I watched it leave my account, and for the first time I felt not like a benefactor, but like a suspect. Mara Chen's office was in a quiet, professional building downtown. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes and a demeanor that wasted no time. I laid it all out for her. The pension, the survivor election, Eleanor's death, the monthly transfers to David, the confrontation, the bank denial, and now the OPM letter. I showed her the blue folder. She listened without interruption, occasionally making a note on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Brewer, you have a procedural and a personal problem twisted together. Let's start with the procedural, the OPM inquiry. They are asking if you are misusing funds. The survivor benefit is intended for the support of a dependent. Your son is not a dependent. You voluntarily giving him the money is not, strictly speaking, what the benefit is for. However," she held up a finger, "however, the money is deposited into your account. Once it's there, it's your money. OPM's concern typically ends at the point of correct disbursement to the retiree. What you do with it after is your business, unless there's evidence of fraud in how you obtained it. Did you lie to get the benefit?" "No, I elected it for my wife. She died." The benefit continued. "Right. So the inquiry is likely a nuisance triggered by your son's call. We will respond with a simple statement. The funds are deposited to your account and used at your discretion. We will not elaborate on what that discretion entails. That should close that loop." A wave of relief washed over me. "So it's not fraud?" "Not based on what you've told me. It's unusual but not fraudulent. Now the personal problem." She tapped her pen on the pad. "The nuclear option you found, Form RI 23-7, canceling the survivor benefit. You need to understand the consequences fully. If you file that form, the survivor benefit stops permanently. It cannot be reinstated. Your annuity increases by the reduction amount. For you, that's about $50 a month. For your son, it's the loss of $1,820 a month, indefinitely. It would unequivocally cause the loss of his home, as he cannot carry that payment." "I know," I whispered. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice clinical. "If you take this action after receiving this OPM inquiry, and after your son's allegations, it could be perceived as retaliatory. It strengthens any narrative he might construct about you being punitive. It doesn't change the legality, but it changes the story. And in family wars, the story often matters more than the law." She gave me two paths. Path 1. Respond to OPM, shut down the inquiry, maintain the status quo, and deal with David on the personal front. Path 2. File the cancellation form, accept the personal and financial consequences, and make a clean, brutal break. I left her office with no answers, only sharper questions. I drafted the response to OPM with Mara's guidance, a sterile 3-sentence letter that gave them nothing. I mailed it. The act felt like building a barricade. The silence from David's end became profound. A week passed. Then on a rainy Thursday morning, my doorbell rang. It was Chloe, alone. She stood under a small umbrella, her coat barely closing over her pregnant belly. She looked exhausted. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd shown David the truth. She didn't want coffee. She just sat, her hands folded over her stomach. "He's not sleeping," she said, not looking at me. "He's like a ghost. He's applied for 2-second jobs, but they're overnight stocking jobs, and with the baby coming, he's terrified. And he's ashamed. So ashamed that it's turned into this rage at you. Calling OPM, that was. I didn't know he was going to do that. I'm sorry." I nodded, waiting. "We can't move in with my sister. Her husband lost his job. There's no room. We have nowhere to go, Leonard. If we sell after realtor fees and what we owe, we might walk away with a few $1,000s. Not enough for a security deposit anywhere decent, not with a baby. We'd be moving into a rental that costs more than our current mortgage with nothing saved." She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "He's your son. I'm carrying your grandchild. Is there any way forward?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that question without anger or demand. It was a question of genuine, desperate need, and it shattered the defensive shell I'd built. This was no longer about principle or respect. It was about the survival of my family. "Did he send you here?" I asked softly. She shook her head, a tear escaping. "No, he'd be furious. He thinks asking for anything now is weakness. He thinks we have to win this. I don't want to win. I want a home for my baby." I made a decision in that moment. The moral calculus shifted. This was no longer about David and me. It was about Chloe and the unborn child. They were the true dependents now, caught in the crossfire. "Wait here," I said. I went to my study. I didn't print the cancellation form. Instead, I printed a different document. I came back and placed it in front of her. It was a simple, notarized agreement I had drafted myself. It stated that I, Leonard Brewer, would continue the monthly gift of $1,820 to David and Chloe Brewer for a period of 5 years, to be used expressly for housing costs. In exchange, they would agree to enter formal financial counseling, provide me with quarterly budgets, and David would participate in a job training program to increase his earning potential within 2 years. At the end of 5 years, the gifts would cease. It was a bridge, but a structured one, with guardrails and a defined end. "It's not a blank check," I said. "It's a life raft with conditions. He has to want to get to the other side." Chloe read it, her tears falling on the paper. "He'll hate the conditions. He'll say you're controlling him." "He's right," I said, surprising myself with my own bluntness. "I am, because what he's been doing isn't working. This is the control of someone who wants to see him survive, not the control of someone who wants to keep him small. There's a difference." She took the paper. "I'll talk to him." She left. I didn't expect it to work. I braced for David's furious rejection. But the call that came that evening wasn't from David. It was from a blocked number. "Mr. Brewer," a man's voice said, smooth and unfamiliar. "Yes." "Mr. Brewer, my name is Robert Hill. I'm a journalist with the Asterisk Daily Chronicle Asterisk. I'm working on a story about intergenerational wealth transfers and the strain on public pension systems. I've come across some interesting information regarding your federal pension and its survivor benefit. I understand there's a unique situation with your adult son. I'd love to get your perspective on the record. The room tilted. A journalist. How? How did a journalist get this information? The only people who knew the details were me, David, Chloe, my attorney, my accountant, and the OPM caseworker. And David, in his rage, had just proven he was willing to use institutional weapons. This was the "it gets worse" moment. He hadn't just gone to the government, he'd gone to the press. He was trying to court of public opinion, to paint me as the greedy retiree hoarding benefits while his young family struggled. He was turning our private tragedy into a public morality play. I told the journalist I had no comment and hung up. My heart was racing. The stakes had just exploded beyond my front door, beyond the courthouse. They were now in the realm of reputation, of legacy. My quiet life as Leonard, the retired mailman, was about to be dissected in the newspaper. I drove to David's house. I didn't call first. He answered the door, his face a mask of shock at seeing me. Before he could speak, I held up my hand. "Did you talk to a reporter from the Asterisk Daily Chronicle?" His shock morphed into defiance, then a flicker of guilt. What if I did? Maybe people should know how the system lets people suffer. "Look at me, David," I said, my voice low and intense. "You called OPM on me. Now you're calling reporters. You are burning down every single bridge between us to try and force a result. Do you understand what happens if that story runs? It doesn't force me to give you money. It paints you as a man who can't provide for his family trying to raid his father's pension. It paints me as either a villain or a fool. There are no winners in that story, only wreckage." "I don't have a choice," he shouted, the veneer cracking. "You're leaving me no choice. You have the power and you're squeezing me with it. I gave Chloe a proposal today, a 5-year bridge, with conditions to help you stand on your own. That was your choice. This," I said, pointing back in the direction of the city, "talking to reporters is a different choice. It's the choice to destroy instead of build. So you tell me right now, which path are you on, because I can't walk both." He stared at me, chest heaving, trapped in the canyon of his own making. The father-son bond was now a thin wire over a chasm, and he was holding a blowtorch. The transition into the final act wasn't about a legal ruling or a financial decision anymore. It was about whether that wire would hold, or whether we would both fall into the public, painful abyss below, with a journalist waiting at the bottom to report on the crash. The reporter's story ran the following Sunday. It was on page 5 of the local section, not the front page, but the headline was a knife. "Postal pension fuels family feud over home." It was worse than I imagined. It painted David as a struggling, soon-to-be father caught between a bad housing market and a father who clung to a federal benefit while his son floundered. It described the survivor benefit in dry terms, then noted my refusal to sign a bank letter that would have secured my son's home. My attorney's careful statement about funds being used at my discretion was framed as a legalistic dodge. The article was technically accurate in its facts, but its soul was a narrative of generational selfishness. It quoted an anonymous family friend who said, "It's a tragedy when the safety net becomes a weapon." I knew that was David's phrasing. The fallout was swift and quiet. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, stopped waving when I mowed the lawn. At the grocery store, I felt sidelong glances from people I'd known for years. My friend Walter called, his voice strained. "Len, I got a call from that reporter. He asked about your financial character. I told him to get lost, but people are talking." The shame was a cold, heavy cloak. This was the price of David's choice. Our private war was now a public exhibit. I did not hear from David or Chloe. The automated transfer occurred on the 1st of the month. I did not stop it. To stop it now would be seen as pure retaliation, proof of the article's claim. I was trapped by my own consistency. Then 10 days after the article, a second piece appeared. This one was an op-ed, not a news story. The title was The Ungrateful Beneficiary, When Help Breeds Entitlement. It was written by a personal finance columnist. She had taken the facts of the first story and flipped them. She detailed the survivor benefits purpose, explained the reduction I'd accepted for decades, and framed the monthly transfers as silent, substantial support willfully ignored. She wrote about the epidemic of parents sacrificing retirement security for adult children and asked a pointed question: when does helping become enabling, and when does a gift become an entitlement? She didn't name us, but anyone who'd read the first piece knew. The court of public opinion, fickle as ever, began to shift. I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from a woman in the next town over. She wrote, "I read about your situation. My husband and I are in a similar bind with our daughter. Thank you for making me feel less alone." The shame cloak didn't vanish, but it frayed at the edges. The true pivot came on a Tuesday afternoon. My doorbell rang. It was Chloe. She was holding a car seat carrier. Inside, swaddled in a blue blanket, was a tiny sleeping baby, my grandson. "His name is James," she said softly. "He was born 5 days ago, early, but he's healthy." I stepped back, wordlessly inviting her in. She placed the carrier on the living room floor. We sat in silence for a minute, just watching the baby's chest rise and fall. "David didn't want me to come," she finally said. He's read the op-ed. He hasn't left the house except for work. He's shattered, Leonard. The article he wanted to pressure you ended up exposing him. He feels naked." "Where is he now?" I asked. "At home, staring at the wall, I think." She took a deep breath. "I brought you the agreement, the one you gave me. He signed it." She pulled the folded papers from her diaper bag. There it was, my proposed 5-year bridge agreement. At the bottom, David's signature, rough and slanted, as if written under great duress. Next to it, Chloe's. It was signed but not notarized. He said, "Tell him I'll do it. Tell him I'll go to the counseling. Just make it stop." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "He doesn't want your help. He's accepting your surrender terms. That's not a bridge. That's a capitulation, and I can't build a family on that." She was right. The document in my hands was a trophy of a battle won, but the war would continue in every resentful budget meeting, every grudging counseling session. It was a blueprint for 5 more years of misery. I looked at baby James. I thought of Alina. I thought of the promise we made, a promise of security, not strife. The survivor benefit was a manifestation of love, not a tool for negotiation. I stood up. "Wait here," I said. I went to my study. I didn't retrieve the cancellation form. Instead, I took a blank sheet of paper. I wrote a single sentence at the top: "Amendment to Agreement." Beneath it, I wrote, "The terms of the 5-year financial support agreement are hereby void. The monthly gifts will continue without condition for a period of 3 years. Upon the conclusion of 3 years, the gifts will cease." I signed it. I dated it. I brought it to Chloe. "Give him this," I said. She read it, confusion on her face. "No counseling, no budgets." "No," I said. "The conditions were about controlling his behavior. That's over. This is now a simple, timed gift. For James, for you, for him. It's not a tool. It's just money for a defined time. What he does with it and with his life is his business. My only business is being his father and James's grandfather." She began to cry in earnest then, quiet, relieved sobs. "He doesn't deserve this." "Maybe not," I said, "but James does, and you do. And maybe in 3 years he'll have found a way to deserve it for himself." Chloe left with the baby and the amended agreement. I didn't know if David would accept it. The lack of control might anger him more. But I had finally separated the financial mechanism from the relationship. The pension benefit would do its practical work, and I would do the emotional work of being a family, separately. 2 weeks later, I was raking the first fall leaves in my yard when a car pulled up. It was David. He got out alone. He looked thinner, older. He walked up the driveway and stopped a few feet from me. "Chloe showed me the amendment," he said. I leaned on my rake, waiting. "I don't understand it," he said, his voice raw. "You win. You had every right to cut me off. After what I did with the reporter, why would you do this? Why give more with no strings?" I looked at him, my son, so lost in the forest of his own pride and fear that he couldn't see the clearing. Because the strings were choking us both, David. The money stopped being a gift a long time ago. It became a scorecard. I'm tearing up the scorecard. For the next 3 years, you will receive a monthly gift from me. That's all it is. What you think of me, what you think of yourself, what you do with your career, that's all separate now. The money is just money. He stared at the ground, at the leaves by his feet. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "The op-ed columnist," she called me for a follow-up. I told her not to print another word. I told her I was wrong. He swallowed hard. "I was asterisk wrong, Dad, about your job, about your pension, about everything. I felt so small, and I made you small to make myself feel bigger. It was cowardly." It was the first true, unvarnished apology. It didn't fix anything, but it unlocked a door that had been jammed shut. "I know," I said simply. "I don't know if I can fix this," he said, a tremor in his voice. "You don't have to fix it today," I said. "You just have to show up tomorrow and be a father to your son. The rest we'll figure out." He nodded, a quick, jerky motion. He didn't come in, he didn't hug me. He got back in his car and drove away, but it was a start. The 3-year clock began. The transfers continued. David did not submit budgets. He did not go to formal counseling, but he did start a night course in project management, paid for by a scholarship he found himself. He told me about it 6 months in, not as an obligation, but as news. Chloe sent me pictures of James every week. I was invited to his first birthday party. The final surprise came in month 18 of the 3-year bridge. I received a letter from the Office of Personnel Management. It was a routine statement, but one line caught my eye. It listed my current monthly annuity amount. The number was slightly higher than it had been. I got my calculator. The increase was exactly $52.18. The 4% survivor benefit reduction was gone. My full annuity had been restored. I had never filed the cancellation form. I called OPM bewildered. After being transferred twice, a patient supervisor explained. "Mr. Brewer, our records show the survivor benefit election was terminated due to the death of the last eligible beneficiary. It's an automatic review process. Sometimes there's a lag. The adjustment is retroactive to the date of death, but there's a statute of limitations on back pay. You'll receive a lump sum for the past 24 months of overdeduction." Alina had died 6 years ago. The system, in its slow, unimaginable logic, had finally caught up to the fact that there was no one left to survive me. The benefit I had been voluntarily routing to David had officially ceased to exist at the federal level. The money I was sending him was now, unequivocally, coming from my full pension. The survivor benefit was gone. The irony was perfect. The financial reality David discovered with such shock had now formally evaporated, even as the practical support continued. The ghost had been laid to rest by a bureaucrat in an office somewhere. The back pay lump sum was deposited into my account, a modest amount. I didn't tell David. That money went into a new savings account I opened for James. The 3-year mark arrived last month. On the 1st, no transfer left my account for David and Chloe's joint checking. The bridge was closed. I waited, wondering if there would be a panicked call. The call came that evening. It was David. "Dad," he said. There was no panic in his voice, just calm acknowledgement. "It stopped today." "It did," I said. "We're okay," he said, and then he told me. The project management certification had led to a promotion. Chloe had landed a stable, full-time design job with benefits. They had been living on their increased income for the past year, banking every dollar of my gift. They had built a savings buffer. The mortgage was still a stretch, but it was a stretch they could make. They had used the bridge not just to stay afloat, but to learn how to swim. "We won't lose the house," he said. "We're going to be okay." There was no triumphant music, no grand reconciliation. Just a simple statement of fact, earned through 18 months of night classes, hard conversations, and silent determination. The son who had called my life's work coffee money had finally learned the value of a dollar, and in doing so had learned the value of his father. Last Sunday they came over for dinner. James is 2.5 now, a whirlwind of energy. He calls me Papa. After dinner, David helped me wash the dishes. At one point, he nudged me with his elbow. You know, I finally looked up what CSRS stands for. Civil Service Retirement System. Sounds important when you say the whole thing. I smiled, rinsing a plate. It was a system, I was just a part in it. You were a part that held, he said quietly, almost to himself. He was right. The system, my pension, our family, they were all structures, and structures only hold if the foundation is sound. The foundation wasn't the money, it was the promise behind it, the promise Alina and I made, the promise I kept, even when it was hard, the promise David is now learning to make for his own son. I'm 70 years old. I live in my paid-off house. My pension, my full pension, is more than enough. I have a son who looks me in the eye now. I have a grandson who climbs into my lap and asks for stories about Grandma Ellie. And on quiet mornings, I sit with my coffee and I think about the long arc of a promise, how it bends and strains and sometimes seems like it will break, but how it can hold fast if you're willing to maintain it, not with control, but with a love that is sometimes quiet, sometimes painful, but always, always present. The foundation holds. They say we live in an age of transparency, but I think the most important things are often hidden in plain sight, in the quiet deductions on a pension statement, in the unspoken agreements between generations. My story isn't unique. I've since learned that for the first time in history, half of all parents are now providing regular financial support to their adult children. Nearly half of that help goes straight to housing, to mortgages and rents that would otherwise be impossible. Parents are sacrificing their retirement savings, their emergency funds, their own security to be that bridge. And so often, it's a silent subsidy. The question my experience leaves behind isn't about whether to help. It's about how. When does support become a scaffold that allows someone to build their own strength? And when does it become a cage that keeps them from ever trying to fly? I chose secrecy, and it bred disrespect. I offered control, and it bred resentment. Only when I separated the money from the relationship, when I made the gift clean, timed, and free of strings, did the healing begin. The money became just a tool again, and we could be a family again. The survivor benefit was always meant to be a promise of care stretching beyond a single lifetime. In a way, it still is. It's just that the care it provides now isn't measured in dollars deposited, but in a grandson who knows his grandfather's lap, and a son who finally understands the weight of the foundation he now stands upon. The real inheritance was never the monthly check. It was the resilience to rebuild when the structure shakes, and the wisdom to know that love and money are two different currencies, and only one of them can buy you peace. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been on either side of this silent ledger, I'd encourage you to share it. And if you'd like to hear more stories about the unseen architectures of our lives, the pensions, the promises, the quiet battles that define families, then consider subscribing. There are more foundations out there, holding up more weight than anyone realizes. I'm Leonard Brewer. Thank you for listening.